Hello and welcome to the College Football Focus. I'm Big Italy 42 here with my co-host Spencer Limbach at Spencer_JL. And we got a special guest here from Pro Football Focus, Matt Friedman at Matt F. the Oracle. How's it going today, guys?
Good.
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming on. We're going to go ahead and obviously discuss the main early slate on Saturday. FanDuel and DraftKings, we're going to go position by position. And starting off with some players that Spencer had written up, and then we're going to obviously get Matt's take here on what he thinks and some players he has to add as well. So starting off at the top here, Patrick Mahomes from Texas Tech, $8,600 on FanDuel, $84 on DraftKings. And there were some concerns going into last week. Maybe he wasn't completely healthy, and it seems like he's certainly good to go from now on.
Yeah, he threw for 415 yards last week, ran for a 25-yard touchdown. So if you remember on the podcast last week, we had some reservations going in, but he looked fine. He should be healthy moving forward. And this is a pretty good matchup for him at home against Iowa State, not a team really known for their defense. This is one of the higher total games within this slate. There's actually 3 games with a 70-point over-under, and this obviously is one of them, as most of them are with this Texas Tech offense. Tech's favored by 12 in this one, and as I said earlier, Mahomes is running the ball. That's a key part of his fantasy appeal, is he gets those goal line carries, he gets touches in the red zone. So I really like him in this matchup, and he's actually a little bit cheaper than most of the top flight guys like Seth Russell, Brandon Doughty, and Matt Johnson, and even Baker Mayfield of Oklahoma. So that makes things a little bit easier that he's slightly cheaper than those guys. I think he's a great play on both sides.
Yeah, well, what's your take there, Matt?
Yeah, I like it. I agree. I think he's basically just as dynamic as all of those other guys, basically an arbitrage version. And in situations like that where you have several top-flight quarterbacks, I like to take the cheapest guy. Or in another situation, if there's a guy who is the top, I think clearly the top quarterback at the position, and he's not the highest salaried player, he is a guy that I like to target if I have the flexibility to do so. And so we have that situation at DraftKings. Seth Russell, I think, is clearly the #1 quarterback, not just in this slate, but right now in all of college football. And he has a fantastic matchup this week, a really high over-under, a high implied point total. Going against a team that allows a lot of points, it really is kind of a perfect storm, and he's the 3rd salaried quarterback instead of the 1st. At FanDuel, he's the highest salaried quarterback. So if you're looking to play Seth Russell, I think DraftKings is the place to do it. But then, of course, you have Matt Johnson, Brandon Doughty, Baker Mayfield, all of those guys kind of huddled in a top tier. And really, I think it's kind of like pick your flavor, whichever one it is that you really like. If there's a particular matchup that you really like, any of those guys, I think, can get the job done this week. It really is a great slate for quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like if you're building multiple GPP lineups, it might not be a bad idea to get exposure to all those guys up top there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And even for people who like to do multiple cash game lineups, people who do 2 cash game lineups, there's a lot of options there to choose from.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next guy here that Spencer has written up, Sam B. Richardson from Iowa State. $7,300 on FanDuel, same exact price there on DraftKings, and he's on the opposite side of that Texas Tech game. And as Spencer kind of noted earlier, high total here, and Texas Tech known almost as much for not having a very good defense as they are for having a great offense. So should be plenty of points to go around in this one.
Yeah, and I think Iowa State can really kind of fall into that high-scoring mentality of Texas Tech just because they strike so quickly on offense. Iowa State will probably get a lot more possessions because of that. So that's why I really like Sam Richardson this week. He has dual threat capabilities. And we saw last season, I think he went for 3 or 4 straight 20 to 25-point fantasy outings. So he really definitely has it in him. And went for 25 fantasy points again last week. Could have put up a similar total again this time around. And so he's about $1,500, $1,000 cheaper than all those top flight quarterbacks, so you could save a little bit of cap space. It's probably more of a tournament pick than anything, but I think he has the greatest upside of this kind of mid-range quarterback value right there.
Yeah, you on board with that, Matt?
Yeah, I think you have to like any of those guys who are going up against the top flight quarterbacks. They're going to be in shootouts. They're going to have to throw the ball, or at least if the throw's not there, they're going to take off and run it. So I think he is a guy who has a lot of potential. Another guy I like in that general price range. I need to rephrase that. I don't like him. I'm terrified of him, but I think he could maybe be an intriguing option in GPPs. Is Gerard Randall from Arizona? This is a guy who, in limited touches, is second in the team in rushing. He's a big-time touchdown producer if he gets in the open field. He's got a lot of options there to throw the ball to. He's not a good passer at all, but he's playing in a game where he should be able to throw the ball a little bit. It's a good matchup for him, and if he is able to break off a couple of long touchdowns, I could see how he returns value pretty easily.
Yeah. What do you think about that one, Spencer? Is he on your list too?
I'm looking on Twitter right now. I thought I saw something right before we came on the show that
Solomon starting.
Solomon is not probable, but could play. So
Yeah.
I mean, definitely look at that. We'll probably get more news as the week goes along. I thought I saw something. I can't find it right now. So yeah, definitely go back and look at that. But I don't hate Solomon if he's in there and ready to go, because he does have that dual threat capability.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next guy you've got written up here is Blake Frohamful. What is it?
I don't even know if that's how you say it. I just Fropanapeful.
Well, what do you know how to say this one, Matt?
Just say Fro.
Fluffin' Muffin?
Maybe we'll just go with Blake, because I don't think there's any other quarterbacks named Blake. So we'll just go with Blake then. Blake from UMass, 6,900 on FanDuel, 75 on DraftKings, and facing off against a Bowling Green team that scores a ton of points. Obviously, this is another one that's expected to be a shootout, so getting yourself a cheap piece of this one might be a good way to go.
Yeah, both of these teams just love to pass the ball. There could be 100-plus pass attempts in this game for both teams combined. So this is actually the highest over-under on the board, 79. So you're going to want plenty of exposure to this game. And Blake from UMass put up 363 yards, 3 touchdowns last week. Should be asked to do a ton again this week, just basically trying to outduel Matt Johnson of Bowling Green, and we saw there another quick strike offense. More on that later as we go along through these plays. But, yeah, they're 13-point underdogs in this high-scoring game, so they're just going to be passing the ball like crazy. And he has 2 very good wide receivers. We'll get to those as well later on. So you really like how this sets up game flow, easy matchup, high total over-under. It just sets up really well for kind of a value play for Blake from UMass.
Yeah, are you on the Blake train as well, Matt? And then also, are there any other quarterbacks maybe around this price range, or just anyone else we haven't mentioned that you want to throw out there?
Well, I think his name is Fronoffel, but that sounds like the type of last name that Ben Stiller would make up when he doesn't know someone's last name, and he's just like Blake Fronoffel. But yeah, no, as was said, he has 2 dynamic receivers, and he also has a pretty good tight end. If that guy is actually playing in this game, he's had a leg injury. We really kind of don't know yet if he's playing. But regardless, he is playing in another one of those shootout matchups on the road. High point total, they're going to have to throw the ball. I mean, it would be surprising if they rush the ball maybe even 15 times in this game. They're going to have to throw a lot, and he does have the 2 receivers to throw to. So I like that. I don't really – I mean, Tommy Armstrong is a guy that kind of in theory is sort of undervalued in comparison to the production he has accumulated so far this season, but I don't think he has a great matchup. So he's a guy that I could see might be tempting, but would be maybe something of a value trap. But other than that, there aren't really many guys that really catch my eye lower down in the salaries.
Okay, that sounds good there. Moving on here to running backs, where these first couple guys obviously up at the upper tier, I mean, pretty much by themselves, really. You got Nick Chubb, Leonard Fournette, and Ezekiel Elliott. So obviously everyone who follows college football, even as a casual fan, knows who all 3 of these guys are. So how are you guys separating these? Is there one guy that stands out as a better cash game play, or are you just going to kind of dictate by what you have left in your lineup of who you're going to play the most?
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go, is just see what you have left or see who blends well with what you're trying to do at the other positions. On FanDuel, that guy is probably going to be Nick Chubb because he's a little bit cheaper. Ezekiel Elliott is at 9.4K, Leonard Fournette at 10K, and Nick Chubb is 8.5K. So you definitely like that discount over there. On DraftKings, both Elliott and Chubb are similarly priced, 8.5 and 8.6K. So it's a little more decision over there. Granted, DraftKings or salary cap overall is a little bit tighter, so you may not even be paying up that high. So I'm really looking at Chubb on FanDuel. I like the matchup against Georgia Tech. As I noted in that column there, they've given up a lot of rushing yardage in their past 3 games. 198 yards, 3 touchdowns to the Notre Dame running back, another 3 touchdowns to the Duke running back, and then North Carolina's quarterback went for 145 and 2 touchdowns. So, I mean, I think it's a pretty safe bet that Nick Chubb is going to get his 14th straight 100-plus yard game and probably put 2 touchdowns on top of that.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I like that. Chubb is a really high floor guy, and exactly right. FanDuel is the place to play him. He's salaried underneath CJ Prozise, which I think is I think that's a kind of miscalculation or misvaluation. And then over on DraftKings, I like Elliott as the guy that I would roster out of those top 3, again, in part because he's the cheapest, but he also has a really good matchup, and I think he could provide maybe like upper middle class man's version of Leonard Fournette. He's not going to get Leonard Fournette type of production, but I think at a discount, I think it's a $1,400 discount, he could come pretty close, or he could be good enough to give you an approximation of Leonard Fournette's production in this week. So FanDuel, if I'm paying up, I'm looking for Chubb, and on DraftKings, I'm looking for Elliott.
Yeah, great analysis there, guys. Next one up, Shock Linwood from Baylor. Obviously, we know this Baylor offense is just absolutely terrifying, putting up points in bunches, any and every way possible. 8,100 on FanDuel, 74 on DraftKings. Is he more of a GPP play for you guys? Are you trying to get these other top guys we just mentioned in cash games, or is he a viable cash game option for you as well?
I think a little bit of both. Chubb would be my preferred cash game option on FanDuel, and obviously you're probably not going to fit both Chubb and Linwood in. That's just not going to happen and have some sort of semblance of a lineup around that. So he's probably more of a GPP pick, but if you're using him in cash games, I don't absolutely hate it. Even though Baylor's a 44-point favorite in this game, they could put up 56, 60 points at halftime, and Linwood could be a big part of that. I mean, their last 2 games were sort of blowouts. That last one against Texas Tech, they pulled away a little bit later. But the game before that against Rice, it was pretty much over by halftime. And Linwood got his stats, 150-plus yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. So they've really been riding him a lot lately, even in blowouts. So I really like that. I mean, he could finish off drives for this dynamic Baylor offense, and they move the ball down faster than anyone in college football. So he should get plenty of cracks at it.
Yeah, so you're saying that you do not think that Kansas keeps this one close?
Well, let's just say, that same Kansas team that gave up an NCAA record to Samaje Perine last year of Oklahoma, I think we'll see that level of play again this week. That's more of what I'm leaning towards.
Yeah, this is not going to be a pretty one for the Jayhawks. What's your take here on Linwood and anyone else in the similar price range, Grant?
So I would say Linwood is definitely more for me a GPP play as opposed to a cash game play, and part of that is because in comparison to the other guys, who salaried higher than him, he doesn't get a super high percentage of his team's production, and in part that's because Baylor blows out a lot of teams. But it would be conceivable to see how Baylor scores 5 passing touchdowns in a row. Linwood doesn't get a lot of action, and then he's just kind of benched because the team doesn't really need him to do anything at that point. And that's always kind of the fear with a guy who isn't totally integral to an offense. And so I could see how he has a fantastic game and has 3 touchdowns. I could also see, just because of game flow and because Baylor is so dominant, that it might go against him. So he doesn't feel quite as safe for me, but there's no question that he has a very high upside potential. So I would go with him in in GPP lineups. As far as other guys around there, there's no one who really is super enticing. if I'm not going to get any of those top tier guys, my general mode is just to try to wait and to find cheap running backs who will give me volume, and then I can maybe splurge at the quarterback and wide receiver positions. So there's no one who really entices me around that spot other than Linwood.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a viable strategy, certainly. And then next up, Jordan Kenzeri from Iowa, 5,800 on FanDuel, 62 on DraftKings. And Spencer, you've got him mentioned as a viable not SP2. I'm still in baseball mode. A viable RB2 in your cash game lineups on FanDuel.
Yeah, I actually opened up FanDuel, as I mentioned here in the article, and saw his price and had to kind of do a double take to make sure that wasn't a mistake. And he's averaging 22 fantasy points per game this season, and that's legitimate. It's not like he got 4 touchdowns in one game and hasn't really done anything in the other games. He's been pretty consistent all year, had a hard against the tough Wisconsin defense. And, this Illinois defense, they're pretty much on the opposite side of the spectrum in that regard. They gave up a lot of production to Nebraska's 3rd and 4th string running backs last week. So you can just imagine what Kenzeri can do here in a run-first offense like Iowa that's really cruising along. And he gets all the goal line carries, too. Should get 25-plus attempts here. So I really like him. I think he's a building block on FanDuel. You can work him in there on DraftKings. Might have to be a little more creative with the pricing because it's just a tighter cap there, and he's a little bit more expensive. So, but if you can fit him in, I definitely like that over there as well.
Yeah. You a fan of Kenzeri also, Matt?
Big time fan, and he's exactly the type of guy I'm talking about on FanDuel, a guy who is vastly undervalued, who has a good matchup in that he's favored, he's at home, double-digit favorites. He should get the opportunity to run all day long. And the thing especially that I love about him is that he is so integral to what that offense does. So in terms of rushing production, he gets about 60% of his team's rushing yardage. He gets 67% of his team's rushing touchdowns. And then if you just look at that offense as a whole, he gets about 42% of that offense's touchdowns. So he's going to score a touchdown. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. He has a great chance of scoring a touchdown, and coupled with that, a great chance of going over 100 yards. So I really like him as I think a smart cash game play. And then I think also you could probably throw him into a GPP if you want, because I think he also provides enough upside at his valuation to give you what you need.
Yeah, that's a really good point there, kind of tying into what you were saying earlier about getting yourself some value with the top guys. And then moving over here to wide receiver. Actually, before I move over there, I should ask you if you got anyone else that you wanted to mention there at running back there, Matt.
Yeah, there's one more guy, and it's almost kind of embarrassing to mention him, but Patrick Skov or Skov. I still don't know how to pronounce his name, but from Georgia Tech. I'm just going to say it's Skov. But he's a big-bodied guy who is really short on talent. There's no question about that. He's not a good runner, but he's in an offense that is committed to running the ball. They give it to him at least 15 times a game. He's a big-bodied guy who gets a lot of the goal line touches. He hasn't been super productive as of late, but he has like a 50, 60-yard floor, and in his first 3 games of the season, he scored 7 touchdowns. I think he's in another matchup where they are likely to have the opportunity to score. I could see how he gets a touchdown, potentially 2, and he has that 50, 60-yard floor, maybe kind of 80-yard ceiling. He doesn't have a good yardage ceiling. There's no question about that. But I think he's a cheap guy that you could use, and the likelihood of him scoring a touchdown is pretty high, and that's basically all that you need at his salary. On FanDuel, he's at 5,600, so he's a kind of not totally bottom-of-the-barrel guy, but it's going to be hard to find guys as cheap as he is who can consistently get those goal line touches and just get 15 touches a game in general. So he's a guy that I like.
Yeah, that's a good point there. Moving over here to wide receiver now. Spencer kind of alluded to this earlier, talking about Bowling Green weapons. Roger Lewis at the top there, $8,200 on FanDuel, $78 on DraftKings, and like you mentioned here, coming off a disappointing week 2 weeks ago, he certainly turned it around this past week with over 200 yards receiving.
Yeah, he kind of burned a lot of us in that game at Purdue, but I really wouldn't hold it against him moving forward. As we get into conference play, the MAC notorious for shootouts, notorious for bad defense, and they don't really have anyone in the conference, I don't think, that can slow down Roger Lewis in this passing attack, especially UMass, their opponent this week. We already mentioned this is the highest over-under on the board, and I'm guessing that Matt Johnson and Roger Lewis will have the connection going. Could be another 10-plus catch, 150-plus yards, maybe 1 to 2 touchdowns. And, this is going to be a competitive game throughout. Both teams love to pass the ball. Should be a ton of possessions, ton of scoring. I mean, just everything sets up really well, and I think he's probably my favorite wide receiver on this slate because of it.
Yeah, how about you, Matt? Do you like Roger Lewis as much as Spencer here, or is there another player similarly priced that you like more?
I like him a lot, but I prefer Corey Coleman, especially on DraftKings, because there's only $100 difference in their salaries. And given that, I'm going to go with the guy who has more production up to this point in the season. He hasn't been quite as volatile as Lewis, and Lewis is a fantastic player, but Lewis does have just that aspect of volatility. Corey Coleman has been pretty consistent so far, and Baylor has a much higher implied point total for this matchup. So I'm going to go with Coleman, but I really don't think you can go wrong with either of those guys.
Okay, yeah, that's great there. Next up was another guy we mentioned there, quarterback earlier. Tajay, $6,800 on FanDuel, $72 on DraftKings. Another one where you're talking about how it's been a guy that's been productive all season long, 10-plus catches and 100-plus yards in 3 of 4. So seems like he's got a nice high floor and a pretty nice ceiling as well in this matchup.
Yeah, it seems like we mention him pretty much every week that he's in the player pool, and he really hasn't let us down yet. So Bowling Green defense, as we said earlier, not very good. They're a quick strike offense, Bowling Green that is. So a lot of possessions in this game, back and forth game, high scoring. Sharp's really going to benefit from that, so I think he's a solid mid-range pick there. His price is a little more expensive on DraftKings. He's kind of creeping into that area where he's by Roger Lewis and Corey Coleman, that you would rather rework some things and maybe pay the extra $700 or so to grab one of them. So I'm looking at him more on FanDuel as a wide receiver 2 play.
How about you, Matt? You on board with the Sharp play?
Yeah, and I especially agree with it being a FanDuel play. I think he is much more undervalued on FanDuel in comparison to DraftKings. Now, one thing that I like Sharp, I just wish he scored more touchdowns. I think he makes up for it in part by getting all of those receptions. But one thing to keep in mind, 2 years ago he had around 44% of his teams receiving touchdowns. Last year he had around 25%. This year he's around 12.5%, which is criminally low. Like, that number has to move back up closer to what he has done in years past, because he is still getting all of those targets. So, and he's getting all the yards. So even though he's a guy who doesn't have many touchdowns to this point, I think that will revert. I think he will get more touchdowns as the season goes along, especially since he is the primary guy in that offense. And this is a great matchup. That touchdown onslaught really could start in this game. So it would be totally conceivable to see how he gets 10 receptions, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns in this game. He definitely has that potential. I like him a lot.
Yeah, that's a really great stat about the last couple of years and how that's, like you said, kind of moving lower than you would anticipate that it would be with the kind of volume he still sees. So next guy, Markin Mitchell, also from UMass, $5,000 on FanDuel, $42 on DraftKings. And as Spencer mentions here, nice cash game filler, a cheap option for you here that's still involved in one of these big totals, and not a whole lot of those guys that exist across the industry right now.
Yeah, some of his production may be tied to the status of Rodney Mills, the tight end of UMass. That is, he's a pretty good tight end. He gets a lot of targets in that offense, and he was out last week, so that's kind of where Mitchell stepped up and did most of his damage with over 100 yards, 7 catches, and a touchdown. So that might be something to consider, but I think he's still going to be a decent part of this offense, just because there's going to be plenty of production to go around. That, and I don't see many other, cheap wide receiver 3 plays on FanDuel that have the similar upside to him. And so that's why I like him a lot in this spot. And one thing that I should mention is I said that I didn't really like him on DraftKings. A guy that I would substitute for him on DraftKings, and that's only where he's listed. This game is not on FanDuel. It's the Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky game. Beatties of Middle Tennessee has been probably one of the better wide receivers over the past 3 weeks, probably a top 10 wide receiver. 23 receptions in the past 2 games, 5 touchdowns in the past 3. And Middle Tennessee's just chucking the ball everywhere. I mean, 42 passing attempts and 51 passing attempts, respectively, in their past 2 games. Most of that goes to Beatties. He's only 6.8K. They're playing at Western Kentucky, who also loves to throw the ball, so a ton of possessions, ton of scoring in this game, and I really like Beatties as a wide receiver, too, over there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what about you, Matt? Are you on board with these same guys, or are there other guys you prefer, or anyone else that we haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, so I like a lot of those plays. One guy I also like is Jay Lee. So in a similar situation, the second receiver in a game that's supposed to be a shootout on an explosive offense. He's had fantastic production this year. I think close to 100 receiving yards per game and exactly right at 1 touchdown per game. So he's a guy that I think has a high floor and I think also a pretty high ceiling too. In that Baylor offense, I would expect him to get some production. And then if we're looking kind of more specifically on DraftKings, I would take that matchup that was just mentioned and also highlight Taywan Taylor, Taiwan Taylor, however it is that his name is pronounced. He's a guy who's been very productive for Western Kentucky. Again, that's going to be a shootout. He's with a quarterback that likes to throw the ball. And then another guy, a little bit lower, Tyler Higbee, who's a tight end, but is listed here as a wide receiver. I think he could make for a high floor, kind of like flex option if you wanted. He basically puts up he puts up low-end wide receiver 1 numbers, but right now he's priced as kind of like a low-end wide receiver 2. So I think he provides some value there. And I have to say, it really is kind of sad that on FanDuel that game is not featured because Higbee is the premium tight end, and it's really sad to have to wade through all of these other remaining tight ends without having the option of gronking it up with Higbee if you want to.
Yeah, that's how it's been all season, it seems. With Spencer and I talking on these podcasts, it's been that Higbee in the Western Kentucky game's been only on FanDuel, not on DraftKings anyway. And then, unfortunately, where you have to play a tight end now, we don't have the guy that we want. So, yeah, a little bit of disappointment there, but certainly a guy that you would think goes a little bit overlooked there on DraftKings, considering he's not actually a wide receiver. Speaking of tight end this week, since we have no Higbee on FanDuel and we have to play a tight end, Mark Andrews from Oklahoma, $3,000. Like Spencer mentions right here, we don't have the luxury of playing Higbee. And Mark Andrews is a guy that we've seen have a couple solid performances so far, and obviously Baker Mayfield, a guy that we've talked about already here, as a high upside type of play. And Andrews has gotten a lot of looks in that offense, and for $3,000, I mean, with a lack of a lot of very good options here, seems like he kind of stands out.
Yeah, we've kind of been mentioning Andrews on this podcast as a tournament pick off of Higbee, just in case Higbee doesn't have a good game or gets hurt. That seems to be the only way he doesn't have a good game. So he's actually been putting up decent numbers, compared to other tight ends not named Tyler Higbee. 3 touchdowns in the past 2 games. He's more of a wide receiver tight end hybrid. Plays a little bit in the slot in this spread attack for Oklahoma. So I kind of like him there. Doesn't get a ton of targets, doesn't get a ton of receptions, but he has that touchdown upside. That's basically what you're looking for here at tight end if you have the room to squeeze him in at $3,000.
Yeah, how about you, Matt? You on board with the Andrews play since we're not having Tyler Higbee to play this week?
Yeah, 100% agree. Really, a tight end, if you don't have that premium option, you're just looking for a guy that you hope can score a touchdown, and in your wildest dreams, maybe too, right? And Andrews has that potential. He's done it before, right? He has 3 touchdowns in 4 games played this season. That's pretty good. That's basically as much as you could hope for from any tight end. I think it's all the more remarkable in that he's a freshman who's doing this type of production. And then, again, he has a great matchup with Oklahoma, a high-scoring game. You hope that maybe, some of those extra points will end up going to him. And then one other guy that is also intriguing is Rodney Mills, that tight end from Massachusetts. If he plays, we really have no idea yet if he's going to play. And then he's a dangerous play. I would say he's more of a GPP play. If he's out there, I think a lot of the production that has gone to the wide receivers in the past 2 games might shift back to him. Not all of it, but a substantial chunk of it. But that's if he's out there. And again, even if he suits up, we really don't know how active he will be in the game plan. So he's a risky play. I don't think he's a cash game play, but I think he's a pretty good GPP play. He's only $100 more than the guy we were just talking about. So, I mean, for just like only 100 more, I kind of like him as a guy to throw in your GPP lineups.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
I was going to say the exact same thing pretty much with Rodney Mills. I saw that he did practice earlier this week, but still, like you said, we don't know how involved he'll be. Even if he plays, maybe he won't see the snaps that he used to before the injury. So definitely a GPP play, but I love the upside.
Yeah, and I mean, fortunately, with no Tyler Higbee, you're still saving almost $1,000 from what Higbee was last week, because I believe he was about $4K. So none of these guys are really going to take much of your salary cap anyway. And then the final guy that you've got written up here, Troy Fumagalli, it looks like. That's my guess at that name. $2,300 on FanDuel. And kind of like Matt mentioned here, this is a cheap guy where you're just kind of hunting for that touchdown. You're just searching, hoping that he gets in the end zone because, just not a whole lot of volume upside here.
Yeah, if you're new to college football daily fantasy and you've just been playing these first few weeks, you've been pretty spoiled by just clicking Tyler Higbee into your lineup and getting those 15 to 20 fantasy points. Because back in the olden days, the past 2-3 years or so, we would have to scrounge the bottom of the barrel and just click a guy in and pray for a touchdown, and that's basically what we're doing here. The Wisconsin's #1 tight end, Austin Traylor, is not listed on the depth chart this week. He had an injury that he left last game. So Fumagalli is in the #1 spot, and if you've watched Wisconsin over the past 2 years or 20 years, it seems like they run the same plays over and over. That jumbo set in the red zone, they do a play-action fake, and the tight end's just standing wide open in the end zone. He just catches the ball. So hopefully Fumagalli can get one of those. It's a little bit comforting that he is the #1 tight end on their depth chart right now. So if you need that extra cap space, I really don't mind going there because there really isn't a clear-cut #1 tight end that you're missing out on with opportunity cost.
Yeah, and how about you, Matt? Is this your dirt cheap guy you're going to also, or is there another guy do you think has potential to maybe snag a touchdown here?
No, I agree with it, and I think the logic is sound in terms of the way it would happen. It would be that jumbo package where the tight end is just there, and that's really what you're hoping for. And really, my stomach can't stand for me to look much further past this and look at the $2,000 guys. It's just like my eyes, they can't handle it either. So in general, I've gotten spoiled with Higbee. I don't tend to look this far down because it's at that point it just seems like a crapshoot. So if there's an educated guess that can get you to a touchdown on one of these guys, then that's fantastic. I'm not that good of an educated guesser when it comes to the tight ends. It's just, I look in those top 10 guys and hope that I can find one who has a good matchup with a reasonable chance of getting a touchdown.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this week. As always, thanks to Spencer, and then thanks to our special guest, Matt Freeman. Give him a follow on Twitter there, at Matt F. the Oracle. You got anything you're working on right now, Matt? Like any plans here in the near future? Anything big going on?
Well, I do all of the podcasts for RotoViz, and then I do some pieces for Pro Football Focus, and I also do one piece for Fantasy Insider. So I just I spread my goodness all over the place and try not to get sick in any given week so that I can continue to pump out the good stuff.
All right, well, thanks again for hanging out with us, guys. Go ahead and check out all his great content, all the places he just listed, and once again, at Matt F. the Oracle on Twitter, and we'll see you guys next week.